A gentle Saturday evening settled over Rodeo Drive. Golden lights from high-end fashion stores glow on the stone-tiled sidewalks, weaving a luxurious carpet beneath strolling feet. Convertibles rolled by slowly, and the air carried faint traces of expensive perfume. In a scene seemingly reserved for the elite, a black man about 45 years old stepped out of an old silver SUV. He wasn't wearing a suit. There was no Rolex on his wrist. Just a silver-grey hoodie, dark khaki pants, and worn sneakers. He was tall and broad, but his steps were light and steady, as if honed by years of experience. He looked up at the large sign before him, La Lumière, a restaurant hailed as the pinnacle of refinement in Beverly Hills. Malcolm Hayes. The name was once attached to multi-million-dollar deals and TED Talks, and most notably was listed on the original paperwork as a co-founder of the restaurant he now stood before. But tonight, none of the staff knew who he was, and Malcolm had no intention of revealing it. Not because he was hiding, but because he wanted to listen to the truth not from manager reports, but from glances, attitudes, and the whispered words people thought no one heard. The tall glass door swung open before him. Inside, La Lumière gleamed like a cinematic dream, white linens draped over tables, crystal glasses glittering under chandeliers. Soft jazz music glided through the room. Most wealthy and famous patrons chatted lightly, red wine swirling in elegant glasses. Malcolm entered unhurriedly. Eyes skimmed past him as if his presence didn't belong. He chose a small table near the window, slightly tucked away. No one greeted him. Not a single smile. Then a waitress appeared, neatly dressed. Her youthful face was artfully made up, and her hair was pinned into a flawless bun. She paused before him, scanning him from sneakers to collar, then locked onto his gaze, calm brown eyes, quiet but unyielding. "Are you sure you want to dine here?" she asked. Her tone was soft but sharp enough to slice through the air. Malcolm smiled gently. "Yes. If there's a table available, I'd like to have dinner." But the young woman, Brittany Clark, didn't return the smile. She tilted her head, crossed her arms, and spoke loudly enough for two nearby tables to hear. "It's just that this is a fine dining establishment. The prices aren't exactly gentle." A moment of silence lingered. Spoons paused mid-air. Malcolm maintained his smile as if accustomed to such moments. "I understand," he replied. "I just want dinner, like anyone else." Brittany said nothing more. She turned away, her heels clicking harshly against the wooden floor with each step, a declaration of her belief people like him didn't belong here. The reception desk glimmered under dim lighting. Brittany opened the reservation book, knowing there were tables available tonight. Yet she flipped through the pages, slowly, deliberately wasting time. Her eyes flicked toward Malcolm, still standing patiently at his chosen table, hands in hoodie pockets, quietly observing the restaurant he once helped build. "There's a table available," she said flatly, "but it's near the kitchen. Not ideal. You understand?" Malcolm nodded slightly. "I don't need ideal, just dinner." Brittany smirked, nodding with reluctance. "Follow me." She led him past the central tables where the lights shimmered brightest and diners in silk gowns and polished tuxedos dined in style. No one smiled at him, yet many glanced his way, not because they recognized him, but because they didn't. A stranger in humble clothes among the upper crust was always unsettling. Instead of stopping at the prime tables by the windows or near the jazz stage, Brittany guided him to a tucked-away corner table near the kitchen hallway. The lighting was dimmer and the smell of food drifted in whenever the kitchen door creaked open. "This table seems to suit your style," she said. She placed the menu down with a deliberate thud. The comment cut like a soft blade, cloaked in courtesy. Malcolm only nodded, showing no reaction. He pulled out the chair and sat upright and calm, as if nothing had happened. Yet inside the restaurant, the atmosphere shifted slowly but surely. A young woman in a black blazer glanced over at the adjacent table. Vanessa Green, a 29-year-old tech entrepreneur, was dining with a companion. She leaned slightly and whispered, "That waitress was so rude. He didn't do anything wrong." The man with her, a composed brunette businessman, nodded slightly. "Seems like he's no stranger to this kind of treatment." Brittany lingered a few seconds longer, arms folded. Her eyes drifted again to Malcolm's sneakers, ensuring her disdain was fully delivered. Then she walked away, leaving him in the shadows menu unopened silence, enveloping his table. But Malcolm remained unmoved. He didn't look around, didn't reach for his phone, didn't purse his lips. He sat, quiet as a rock in the river of judgmental glances. And that stillness was what made people begin to notice. Brittany returned about 5 minutes later. In her hand was a black leather-bound menu, stitching meticulous like a designer notebook. But she didn't offer it immediately. She gently placed it to the side, then leaned close enough to assert subtle dominance. "The menu here is a bit different," she said. Her voice was smooth as velvet, but cold as stone. "If you'd like, I can explain the prices." Her eyes darted to the last page where a gold-embossed line read, "Filet mignon Rossini, $350. She emphasized each syllable, as if the dish itself were a slap to the pride of anyone not of status. Malcolm didn't answer right away. He looked up, his gaze deep still and sharp as glass. Then he gave a gentle nod. His voice was low and resolute. "I'll have that." Not a flicker of hesitation. Brittany paused just a beat, almost imperceptible. But for someone as seasoned as Malcolm, it was a visible crack in her mask of arrogance. She quickly recovered, letting out a short, sarcastic chuckle. "Oh, I hope you know how to enjoy it. It's not for every palate." Her tone remained sweet, but each word dripped vinegar. In the following table, Mr. and Mrs. Edwards, a poised older couple, were eating pan-seared salmon. Mr. Edwards furrowed his brow, murmuring, "Surprisingly, he's not reacting." Mrs. Edwards quietly replied, "Maybe he doesn't need to. He doesn't seem weak." "That girl is testing the wrong man." Brittany still hadn't left. Her hand rested on the table's edge, eyes on Malcolm, waiting for a flicker of embarrassment, a second of doubt, or a retraction. But Malcolm said, "Thank you for the recommendation. I look forward to trying the dish." The words, polite and composed, echoed in the tension-soaked room. The waitress turned to go. But before leaving the table, she dropped one more barb, this time loud enough for nearby diners. "People often choose the most expensive item to look classy, but I doubt he's had this before." Malcolm said nothing. He didn't need to. Nearby diners began paying attention. There were no more casual glances. It was focused observation. A few shook their heads. Others pursed their lips. Still no one intervened, just like the world often does, watching injustice, yet too hesitant to confront it. Only Vanessa Green, silent until now, leaned toward her companion and murmured, "He doesn't need to speak. She's digging her own grave. Each word takes her deeper." 15 minutes later, Brittany returned, this time carrying a polished silver tray. The filet mignon Rossini was artfully presented on it, thick-cut tenderloin, topped with rich foie gras, thinly shaved black truffle, blanketing it like a velvet coat. This dish is for connoisseurs. But to Brittany Clark, it wasn't a culinary masterpiece. It was her final weapon. She paused beside the table, leaning slightly. Then, with enough pressure, she placed the plate down, letting out a crisp clack that carried not loud but deliberate with purpose. "This is the dish you ordered," she said, her voice low but audible to two nearby tables. "I hope you're capable of appreciating it." She tilted her head and gave a forced smile, a blend of provocation and superiority, then stepped back, standing as if waiting for a reaction. Malcolm looked down at the plate. The colors, textures, and aroma were as he'd envisioned when helping the kitchen team craft it on day one. But tonight, as a guest, the dish carried a different sensation, not its scent, but a quiet sting wrapped in the rituals of contempt. He looked up at Brittany, not angry, not surprised, just a calm gaze, as if witnessing someone young turning themselves into the victim of their arrogance. "It looks delicious," Malcolm said. "Thank you." 6 words, delivered with absolute composure. It rattled Brittany. There was no embarrassment, no fear, not even gratitude, just poise. At the following table, Vanessa Green raised her eyebrows, now visibly irritated. She set her wine glass down with a quiet clink. "Unbelievable. He even thanked her. She's trying to insult him outright." Her companion stayed silent momentarily before responding. "She's burying herself by showing her pettiness while he just sits there." At the restaurant center, Mr. Edwards whispered to his wife, "Did you notice no one's stopping her? But no one's amused anymore, Mrs. Edwards nodded, "because they're seeing this is more than just a dinner." Brittany turned to leave, but before stepping away, she dealt one last veiled jab, this time dressed as a sugary offer. "If that dish isn't to your liking, we have simpler options." Malcolm looked up. His smile remained, steady, unshaken. "Thank you. I'll consider it." And so she walked away, leaving him in the shadowed corner, now a silent focal point impossible to ignore. From a distance, manager Daniel Ross started paying attention, not because he heard anything, but because the silence had grown too loud. The kind that made people lower their glasses, stop their laughter, raise their heads, and wait. Malcolm picked up his knife and fork, cutting into the steak slowly, precisely, as if nothing had happened. The soft yellow chandelier light cast over his face, highlighting his high nose bridge, deep eyes, and the way he sat, not defensive, but causing everything around him to reflect. The meat melted in his mouth, blending with the rich foie gras and the faint truffle scent like a quiet symphony. Malcolm nodded slightly, eyes briefly closed in genuine enjoyment, not because the food was exquisite, but because his inner peace remained intact, even in a place that tried to make him feel small. But no one laughed anymore. The air inside the restaurant had thickened and conversations had dwindled. A few patrons glanced at Malcolm and then turned away as if ashamed of having stayed silent too long. At the bar, a young staff member named Chris, Brittany's co-worker, leaned against the counter, still holding a menu. He watched the waitress walk past, his expression tense. Chris whispered to the person beside him, "He hasn't complained, but she is making a fool of herself." Beside him stood a veteran bartender. He didn't speak, just let out a quiet sigh as if he'd seen this arrogance before. At the center table, Mr. and Mrs. Edwards continued watching. She placed a hand on his, speaking softly. "Do you see it? He doesn't need to prove anything. But look around. The entire room is shifting." Mr. Edwards nodded, eyes fixed on Malcolm. "Because his silence is louder than any accusation." Vanessa Green, now visibly stirred, set her glass down decisively. She leaned toward her companion. She thinks he'll walk away after the insult. No, she's witnessing something she doesn't have the grace for. Her companion nodded, and the more she tries to bring him down, the more she reveals her emptiness. From afar, Brittany could sense that the glances had changed. They were no longer quiet about the approval of a classist game. Now they were judgmental, cold, and inquisitive. She felt her neck grow warm. Instead of returning to check on the table as protocol demanded, she lingered at a wealthy couple's table, helping them choose a wine. Her voice turned syrupy, head tilted sweetly. The 2015 Margot pairs beautifully with red meat. I think you'll love it. But as her eyes drifted toward the corner where Malcolm calmly ate, her heart skipped. He was still there, posture unchanged, still composed, still neat, still silent, but no longer alone. The room had turned. Silence was no longer compliance, it was the anticipation of something greater, and Brittany knew she no longer controlled the narrative. A large wooden door at the back of the restaurant creaked open. Daniel Ross, La Lumiere's senior manager, emerged from within, walking briskly yet maintaining decorum. He wore a dark grey suit, white shirt, and deep blue silk tie. His attire was unflashy, but each step shifted the room's energy. Daniel scanned. Then his eyes landed on the corner table near the kitchen, where a black man in a grey hoodie now sat, having just set down his utensils after finishing the first portion of his meal. A small wave passed through Daniel's expression. He walked faster. A few nearby diners murmured, "Where's he going? Who's he meeting? That man at the table." Vanessa Green now sat upright, eyes alert, almost as if she anticipated what came next. Daniel stopped at the table. In a short breath, he bowed slightly, face respectful. "Mr. Hayes, I sincerely apologize for the improper welcome tonight. We had no idea you were coming." The entire restaurant froze. A spoon fell onto a plate with a light clink, the only sound in the room. All eyes turned to the corner. Malcolm looked up at Daniel, offering a gentle smile, as if nothing had ever been wrong. "It's all right, Daniel," he replied, his voice low, warm, and steady. "I simply wanted to experience the place I helped build as a regular guest." A whisper rose from a nearby table. "Did you hear Mr. Hayes? Oh my God, Malcolm Hayes. He co-founded Lumiere." Brittany froze at the wine station tray still in hand, knuckles white. She heard every word, and it felt like the blood had drained from her face in an instant. Malcolm Hayes. The name is mentioned in management meetings. The mind behind the service philosophy of balancing luxury with dignity. The man was featured on Forbes for his humanitarian vision in high-end hospitality, and she had served him with the lowest form of contempt. Mr. Edwards set his wineglass down, shook his head, and whispered, "Now it's clear. It's not that he doesn't belong here, it's that this place wasn't worthy of him." Daniel leaned in, speaking quietly. "Would you like me to handle this situation right now, sir?" Malcolm rested a hand on the table and gently shook his head. "No need to escalate things, but after dinner I'd like to speak to the entire staff." He looked up, his eyes locking on Brittany, not with anger or resentment, but with an expression both understanding and stern. That look made her want to cry. And so, without anyone yelling, slamming fists, or storming out, La Lumiere completely shifted from a cold, glamorous restaurant into a room full of people engulfed in shame. The air grew dense, as if every molecule was listening. No one laughed, no one spoke, no one lifted a fork. They were no longer diners. They were witnesses to a quiet truth louder than any defense. Malcolm placed his water glass down. He stood, without instruction. The entire restaurant sat up straight. He needed no introduction, no raised voice. But when he spoke, each word echoed like a bell ringing in the chest of every listener. "I don't blame anyone for not recognizing me. I didn't come here to be honored. I just wanted to be treated like a human being." Short, simple. Yet Brittany Clark, standing in the corner, lowered her head. Malcolm turned to face every table. The faces that once eyed him with skepticism. The whispers about his clothes, his walk, and his table. What saddened me wasn't the seat near the kitchen, not the subtle jabs about price, but when pride is placed above respect. A sigh came from somewhere in the back. A guest quietly laid a napkin on the table, not to leave, but because indifference was no longer bearable. Malcolm continued, his voice calm but impossible to ignore. "I helped found this restaurant, but that doesn't matter. What matters is if I dressed plainly, was not welcomed, how many others have left here carrying the same silent pain." Brittany stood frozen, her hands clenched the edge of her apron, eyes fixed downward. Malcolm looked her way, but he didn't say her name, didn't accuse, didn't cite her role. He asked as a mentor might, "What would you think if the person you scorned was the one who designed the service standards here?" Brittany trembled, not out of fear of losing her job, but because the contempt in her heart had been laid bare before the entire room. From the center table, Mr. Edwards leaned toward his wife and whispered, "I used to think status was the loudest voice. Now I see it's dignity that silences a room." Vanessa Green, who had observed from the start, said nothing. She simply nodded. Malcolm ended with one final line, not loud, not forceful, but it would be remembered long after the night faded. "Respect is not a reward for the rich, the famous, or the powerful. It is a basic right granted to every person simply because they are human." The room didn't erupt in applause. It dissolved into profound silence, where heads bowed and people looked inward. And within that stillness, Brittany Clark understood she had been taught a lesson. Not through punishment, but through a mirror. La Lumière stayed open late that night. Outside, Beverly Hills lights shimmered on polished cars. But inside, a different atmosphere settled, quietly solemn and truly meaningful for the first time in years. The entire staff was gathered in the main hall, no wine trays, tablecloths, or background jazz, just people standing in a circle around a man in a gray hoodie, silent yet commanding, like the center of gravity. Malcolm Hayes stood there, not needing a stage or a microphone, just clear eyes and a sincere heart. He looked at each one, from chefs and bartenders to hosts, pausing a little longer when his gaze met Brittany Clark's. She stood at the edge of the circle, hands clasped tightly, head bowed back stiff, as if questioning whether she still belonged. Malcolm began to speak softly, but with strength. "We all make mistakes, but it's how we face and correct them that defines who we are." He paused long enough for the words to settle. "Tonight I didn't come to test anyone. I came to see what a report can never show, whether we, the people who serve, still remember why we started." No one spoke, but many eyes glistened. Malcolm turned toward Brittany. He didn't say her name, didn't outline her errors, didn't quote her title. He simply invited truth. "I want to listen. From you. Not justifications, but what you truly feel after all this." The room held its breath. Brittany looked up, eyes red, lips trembling, but then she took a deep breath, and for the first time all night she dropped the act. "I'm sorry," she said, voice choked. I looked at your clothes and thought I knew who you were. I served not to serve, but to assert my place. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. I used to think a restaurant was where we showcase status, but tonight I realized no one has the right to strip someone of dignity just because of appearance. Malcolm nodded slowly, no smile, just a look, deeply human. Change doesn't start from perfection, it begins with awareness and the courage to face it. She nodded softly, lips pressed tight, tears flowing. But no one saw her as weak. They saw a person growing before their eyes. From the staff circle, Chris stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Brittany's shoulder. His eyes held no judgment, only compassion, and that simple act made Brittany break down into sobs. Malcolm turned to the group. La Lumière wasn't built with crystal and linen. It was built on how we treat each other, not when someone's watching, but when we think no one is. And that night, those who stood in that room, from chefs to servers, ceased being employees. They became a community relearning their craft through character. Close to midnight, the chandeliers dimmed. Only soft crystal reflections shimmered against polished stone floors. The meeting ended. No applause, no ceremony. But everyone knew one thing: this place would never be the same again. Malcolm Hayes stood at the center, eyes scanning the room he had helped bring to life. No more skeptical glances, no more cold indifference, no more whispers that cut like knives. Only looks of genuine gratitude from people who once believed they understood high-end service, but had never truly understood humanity. Daniel Ross, the manager, stepped forward slightly, bowed. Mr. Hayes, thank you for a lesson none of us dared to ask for. Malcolm smiled. It wasn't a lesson, he said. Just a reminder, sometimes the only thing separating us from arrogance is how we treat those who seem unlike us. He turned to Brittany. She stood not far away, eyes red, but she was not looking down this time. Malcolm said nothing more. He just nodded lightly but meaningfully. I see you, and I believe you will change. She nodded back, unable to speak. When Malcolm left the restaurant, no one escorted him. No one needed to, because every eye in that room followed him with proper respect. The door to La Lumière closed behind him so softly that no one heard it. But the echo lingered. On the Rodeo Drive sidewalk, dim streetlights stretched Malcolm's shadow long across the tiles. He strolled, hands tucked in the pockets of his old hoodie. A soft breeze stirred. A dry leaf twirled in front of his steps. He looked up at the sky, not a single star, yet light was there, reflected from within. A thought drifted through his mind. A restaurant should never just be a place to dine. It should be a place where people remember they deserve respect, not for who they are, but because they are human. Back at La Lumière, a few staff members lingered. Brittany stood beside Chris at the edge of the counter, where she had whispered mocking lines hours earlier. Now she said just one sentence quietly, but from the heart: starting tomorrow, I'll begin again. Not because someone made me, but because I don't want to be who I was today. Malcolm didn't look back. He didn't need a final glance at La Lumière, because he knew the true light of that place had just been relit. A story without a dramatic climax. No shouting, no revenge, just someone who knew when to stay silent, when to speak, and how to hold to his values. Malcolm Hayes entered La Lumière in ordinary clothes and left as a mirror, not because he was the founder, not because he was wealthy, but because he refused to let someone's smallness make him smaller. All night he never said, "Do you know who I am?" He let others see who they were by how they chose to act. And when the truth came out, he didn't punish, he educated. La Lumière didn't change overnight, but that night it started to live up to its name, light. Not from chandeliers, but from an awakening inside people who had once lost their way. You are the one reading or watching this story. Have you ever judged someone just by how they looked? Have you ever stayed silent when you saw someone disrespected just because it wasn't your place? Have you ever forgotten that respect is the smallest thing, but never an optional thing? You may not be Brittany Clark, but sometimes you might have stood where she did in real human moments. So the final question this story asks is not what do you think of Malcolm Hayes, but who do you want to be? When no one knows who you are, if this story made you pause even for a moment, share it. Not because it's emotional, but because someone out there might need a lesson. They've never been given the chance to learn. Leave a comment. Who were you in this story, Malcolm Brittany? Or a quiet observer? And don't forget to hit subscribe to Touching Story so you never miss a story that reminds us kindness always matters. See you in the following story.